Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our April Mid-Market Tech Talk. We're in for a great conversation today with our panelists, Joel and Ted, who come from Evolving Solutions. And they're going to go into a conversation about the history of Flash, where the current Flash market is, and how the 5200 is an opportunity creator. If you have any questions throughout the conversation, please post them in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our host, Roger Caston.
Thank you very much, Kat. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. Special thanks to Joel Conaway and Ted Latofsky. I'd really like to start off with just a brief introduction by each of us, how we got to where we're at today before we get into the Flash. And I'll just, for myself, I started off life as a geologist, not in the high-tech world, far from it, but used to sit here and think about how sometime in the future, things are going to be all computerized and this is going to be great. And unfortunately, the geology market is very cyclic, and in the mid-'80s, it really crashed. And I ended up going into high tech, ultimately ended up with LSI Logic, who was the kings of ODM storage. We were providing hard drive-based storage systems to IBM, to HP, to Dell, to Silicon Graphics, to a whole lot of companies. And I actually ran their competitive intelligence and analysis section. 10 years later, they were acquired by NetApp, and I ran NetApp's competitive advantage team. And then in 2015, transitioned to IBM, where I begged to do anything that wasn't competitive, and ended up involved in the flash storage arena, where I've been ever since. And Joel, if you'd like to fill us in on how you've arrived where you are today with Evolving Solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me here today. I started in domino development on the AS400. I've been doing storage for 20 years, but that was how I got an internship. My college advisor had taught someone who ran that group in Rochester, Minnesota, and I started there. The next summer I came back, I was in pre-sales technical support, advanced technical support for the now I-Series, and then I thought, this is great. I went with one of them to lunch with a customer, and they talked about technology and got to eat lunch, and I thought, this is awesome. I want to do that. How do I do this? And they didn't need anybody in I-Series sales, but the storage team in Minneapolis did. And so I started in storage sales there. I was a sales rep. I was a manager. And my last 2 years at IBM, I worked on the XIB acquisition from 2008 to 2010. And ever since then, I've been at Evolving Solutions, where I joined my mentor and do pretty much the same thing, high-end storage architecture and design. And it's been a fun job. And that's why I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can.
Fantastic. And Ted, what can you tell us about yourself? You've got quite a history.
I do. I'll say I've done everything from having been in the military and doing security work. I have a degree in law enforcement and a degree in philosophy. I've been a VAR and a business partner. I found myself, I was the storage architect for state government and doing a lot of interesting heterogeneous work. From there, I met Joel Conaway, and I ended up also at IBM. And then I went to Evolving. I got to follow Joel Conaway, and have been at Evolving Solutions, where I do big animal storage architecture and data center work.
That's fantastic. So clearly, you guys are bringing a lot of brain power into this situation. And Joel, I have to tell you, an interesting tie-in. When you mentioned helping onboard XIV, when I came to IBM in 2015, the first task I was assigned was to oversee something called Blue Alpine, which then became known a short time later to the world as FlashSystem A9000, which was essentially the flash version of XIV. So it's a very small world that we live in. A lot of interconnection.
And I think that 2008 time was interesting. The general manager of IBM Storage at the time was a guy named Andy Monshaw. And he made a series of acquisitions that kind of started the ball rolling to where it is today, and such a consolidated picture that has such a great outcome for customers. They bought XIV, they bought several other companies, and that simplicity model, the XIV, I think was developed over those last 10 years and 12 years into the FlashSystem family today. And that was the strong part that came from that technology, spread across the entire IBM portfolio, and really changed the game before that. I had many customers on SVC since that was announced back in 2003. Ted was one of them. And, I remember at the time thinking, oh, this is great, but we had no idea until we saw what was possible in the user interface with the XIV of what could be done. And then taking that, building upon what's there into what we have today, so many homegrown IBM products that are fantastic. And that was definitely not the case 15, 20 years ago. It was very obvious which ones were homegrown 20 years ago and which ones were OEMs or acquired products from other companies. And it's completely reversed today, which has just been great to watch.
And it really is interesting. I feel sort of an immediate kinship with the both of you based on your long histories and varied histories in this market. I know that when I came to IBM, I was exceedingly hardware centric. In my brain, everything started with hardware, and software was just that thing you added after the fact. And over the last 6 or so years, I've definitely made quite a path to where I'm now just fascinated by the flexibility that software brings to the picture, that it's really about software, but you have to have a really solid hardware underpinning to really function. So it's been very interesting being on the inside, watching that. And I think one of the smart moves that IBM made, you indicated the acquisitions that were taking place, and IBM acquired a company called Texas Memory Systems. And they did that in 2012. And Texas Memory Systems really was, I think, one of the first solid state providers out there. They started back in, I believe, 1978, creating flash-based or solid state-based product. Initially, it wasn't even flash. And it just sort of evolved over time. And I think that was an incredibly fortuitous move for IBM, because today, what people know as the FlashSystem product family is the direct descendant of Texas Memory Systems. And do you or Ted, either one of you, have any views? I mean, you've been involved with IBM long enough now to have seen a lot of changes, and over, say, just the last, let's go 5 years. 5 years doesn't seem long, but I always tell people computer years and dog years are the same. Just multiply by 7 because things change. So do either of you have a feel for how things have been going over the last 5 years, particularly from an IBM and a flash standpoint?
Well, I think, what's really unique You talked about the software, and the software is key, making it simple. There's a lot of things customers just don't need to see. It just needs to be done optimally for them, and they just want to use and consume the resource. But when you look at that software, that's how everyone else is trying to optimize flash. They're using industry standard commodity components. They're trying to optimize it, which is what IBM was doing with XIV 14 years ago, taking an array of industry standard low-cost drives and making it appear as a grid together, which at the time was very revolutionary. There's still some people doing those kind of things today with industry standard SSDs, but what's unique about IBM is from that acquisition of Texas Memory Systems, building out the flash core modules, building hardware compressed, custom-built flash devices into the array has created that unique differentiator, because I don't have to manage that. I don't have to control it or tune it. I just install that as the drive in my device. But number one, economically, that puts IBM in an incredible position where the cost per terabyte of effective storage is so much lower than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and even today compared to competitive alternatives. It's without a doubt the price leader, no matter what kind of workload you're considering it for, and density leader. There's nobody packing that much because of that hardware compressed custom engineering from that Texas Memory Systems acquisition. Packing that much into such a tiny space is so unique, and power and cooling goes with it. But the other part with it that we didn't know 5 years ago would be a differentiating talk point is right now, you know, if you want to buy some of those industry standard components that are all OEM from people like Supermicro and things like that, put your order in now and you might get it 6 to 9 months from now. Whereas IBM, with the custom development and the supply chain that's second to none and has been for a long time, because of that, you can actually get flash tier 1 storage when you want it. You can place an order and reasonably expect to get it. And you can do that because IBM is not relying on the same suppliers as everybody else and trying to get data efficiencies out of software. They're packing it into the hardware, and that just makes it very easy from a sizing perspective, a purchasing perspective, and a deployment perspective. Ted, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm going to go from the entirely opposite end of the universe. In the last 7, 5, and especially in the last 3 years, we've seen that the advent of on-tap computing, which is another way of looking at cloud, has changed the way businesses consume technology. They expect things to be fast, agile, readily available, and easy to use. And historically, that kind of engineering, that kind of technology was really relegated to big monolithic enterprise Fortune 500 companies. So all of a sudden, as this pervasive business culture of agility and responsiveness starts to find itself all the way in what we think of as small business, IBM's ability with this single product family from the 5200 all the way up gives us this ability to present a feature set, a product portfolio to customers that places enterprise behavior around performance, availability, reliability, configurability, and consumption that makes every business capable of acting like the enterprise.
Man, I'd hire you guys. I really like hearing this and hearing it from your standpoint. I mean, I think a lot of those things internally, but it never carries as much weight as when somebody who's now outside the company looking in says that. So, I mean, that's incredibly gratifying to hear. And I'm in complete agreement with you. It has been a wild ride. And one of the things I'm truly grateful for, and I know in talking with our field people and our business partners, is coming to this sort of homogeneous line now, certainly with respect to block storage, where we no longer have a Spectrum Accelerate-based series of products like the FlashSystem A9000 and a series of Spectrum virtualized based products where we then had StoreWise and FlashSystem, but to where today we just have FlashSystem, and it's uniform and it's consistent, as both of you gentlemen were just saying, and it's obtainable. And one of the things that has been, I know this makes me sound geeky and silly, but just thrilling to watch has been the development of, as you mentioned, I believe a little earlier, Joel, the consistent size, 2.5-inch form factor flash core modules. And, you know, we saw those first ones come out. They were a derivative of the original micro latency module that Texas Memory Systems, now what we think of as FlashSystem, created. And those were really cool, but only for the FlashSystem 900. And when they went to this NVMe-based 2.5-inch form factor, and suddenly we could use it in most of the product line, it got interesting. And in 2018, when they brought it out, it was Flash Core Module 1, or what we would sometimes internally just call FCM1. And then 2 years later, in 2020, they brought it out as the FCM2. And to the outside world, very little had changed. They added one larger module. But what they didn't tell people for 1 year was that it was based on QLC flash. And to me, that is fascinating because no one else in the industry has been able to figure out how to effectively use QLC flash as primary, tier 1, even tier 0 flash. Because unless you really understand how to manipulate it and work with it the way IBM does, it tends to be slow. When you know how to work with it, it's anything but slow. In fact, we're actually getting better performance out of QLC-based flash than we were out of the previous TLC-based flash. And today, in 2022, IBM introduced FCM3. So for any clients who are acquiring a 5200, a 7300, a 9500, they will get the FCM3s. And, you know, Joel, you had mentioned earlier the unique differentiation in there, the built-in compression and encryption engines. And it's still as fast today as it's ever been, faster, but without changing the engine, but changing the software that we use to talk to it. IBM has tied Spectrum Virtualize even tighter to the Flash Core Module 3. And with this new hinting architecture, we actually have picked up the ability to now have up to 3-to-1 data reduction with that module. So when a client buys a 38.4 terabyte module, they may see up to 115 terabytes from that module with no performance hit whatsoever, which is fascinating. And I don't know, for either of you gentlemen, are you seeing a lot of usage? I mean, you've certainly indicated you see the value. Are you seeing a lot of use cases where this is really something that you're able to maximize on?
I'm going to say that I've seen it immediately, and here's why. Remembering that the Flash Core Module technology does this hardware level compression, right? It's not done in software. So the same performance expectations we see for self-encrypting drives, we now see for this hardware compression. When we use the IBM FlashCore modules, we get this 2-to-1 and now 3-to-1 inline at hardware speeds. So now the form factor and the dollar value have condensed themselves so much that we are beginning to see customers who want to increase their availability to 100%. That now, with the capacity, the physical footprint, and the price performance, they will acquire two 5200s instead and hyperswap them together, where again, even 3 or 5 years ago, conversations about 100% guaranteed uptime had a dollar value that no one other than those Fortune 500, Fortune 50 customers had. So now we see an immediate attention, immediate traction with customers who are looking to do that in a smaller capacity, in a smaller footprint, and on a smaller form factor. And yet at the same time, given those numbers, having conversations about more than a petabyte of capacity and that level of redundancy and availability is, again, a real game changer and differentiator.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, one of my favorite stories, we had a customer where this isn't even on the current generation. This was on the previous FS 7200. FS 9200 was the previous flagship. And we went from 14 racks of their old storage down to 20U or 10 devices split across 2 data centers. And the performance got better, and they were partially full 7200s. So, you know, we left room in there so they could grow. And now we're there talking to them about using safeguarded copy because cyber resiliency is such a hot topic. You've got the capacity, you have all the software you need to orchestrate and execute these point-in-time immutable copies. Turn it on and use up this extra capacity because you have it, and they have it because of leveraging the hardware compression and the FlashCore modules. And it was like getting them a free data center. And now that they have a free data center, everything else looks better. All the economics of owning a data center look better. Their IT department looks better. And it has been so minimally invasive to their environment, even though they had to make a leap and do some conversion to get there. The process of doing that was very simple. The migration was very stress-free, and it's been rock solid ever since. And like Ted said, you know, the economics now enable you to get 2 systems instead of 1 and hyperswap. And no matter what array it is, no matter any one single storage array, is a single point of failure because of that code stack. If you have 2 of them and you can tolerate a weird code bug happening in one and still continue on the other, that's unique. And IBM is far ahead of the game. And like Ted said, you know, hyperswap was a technology you would talk about if you were a bank 5 years ago and money was no object. Well, I'm going to get hyperswap. But now any customer can take advantage of that because of the price point, especially of the 5200. At an entry level, it makes so much sense. And we have another customer who has standardized now on the 5200, and they have distribution centers and remote locations all around the country and the world, and they are landing a 5200 in each of those data centers, not only to standardize the management with storage insights across the whole world, but now they want to bring safeguarded copy to these remote locations because the internet connection is not great always. They can't send data back and forth between the data center. This way they can take point-in-time immutable copies, have them local to the site, be able to fall back to them without having to copy something back from Minnesota to wherever they are around the world. And that has been just a huge advantage to them in their planning and capabilities, and they're planning on rolling that out everywhere this year.
Wow. I mean, guys, that's fantastic. And that's certainly how I feel about it. So I'm thrilled to hear you guys talking about it the same way. And you mentioned safeguarded copy. Safeguarded copy, you know, again, when I came into IBM, I focused on the FlashSystem A9000 first. but my eyes were really big. I mean, I was looking and learning about, IBM Z. I was learning about DS8000. I was learning about everything I could. And one of the features that I saw was safeguarded copy. And I used to just sit there. And in fact, I would talk to my manager about, why don't they bring this over to FlashSystem? And, way back 5 years ago, they're like, come on, that's a mainframe thing. That's not a general purpose thing. Well, fast forward 5 years later, it's a general purpose thing. And suddenly everyone has the opportunity to really, really gain a weapon and a tool in this cybersecurity aware world that we live in now. And it is fascinating to me how it all ties together, particularly things like FlashCore Module 3s, where suddenly we've gained the ability to give you even more compression capability, and you have it right there on that primary storage, which is where the safeguarded copies live. Those immutable copies you mentioned, and they're hidden from sight. They can't be accessed by the bad actors, but you've got the elbow room now because of FlashCore Module 3. So it is amazing how it all ties together. And, here is where I have become a huge believer in the software, the underlying software capabilities. I always understood software-defined storage, but it still was kind of a vague and nebulous term that people threw around a lot. And, you gentlemen both have mentioned SVC, and certainly that was a hallmark with SVC. But what a lot of people haven't really grasped is a flash system. It's an integrated storage system. It's the Spectrum virtualized software stack. It's the hardware. It's all right there, but it is totally software-defined storage. And it's fascinating to me that this box that you could have bought, say, 3 years ago, didn't have deduplication. But then suddenly, with a code update, you could use data reduction pools and have deduplication. And nobody had safeguarded copy. But with a code update, if you're using NVMe-based systems so that there was enough horsepower, you suddenly had safeguarded copy. But what's even crazier is if you reach out and virtualize somebody else's storage system, whether you're doing it with SVC or whether you're doing it with FlashSystem, if you reach out and encompass that third-party storage system, that aging third-party system now just gained the common, uniform, consistent management, but it also gained safeguarded copy, which I'm not aware of anybody else doing these kinds of things. I mean, everyone has different ways of approaching it, but I'm not aware of anybody who's doing it as easily for the clients. And I'll shut up for a minute and let you guys chat.
No, I agree. And I think that's made it simple. The one thing that this technology has done in the flash system world, other than merging the best out of the three product families that came before it, is maturity around enterprise reliability, availability, serviceability. It used to be, you mentioned the DS8000, and we support a lot of large-scale DS8000 customers in the IBM Z and IBM I space. It used to be it was a very long list of reasons why you'd go with a DS8000 versus a flash system. And it really has become quite simple today. If you need to have your data exist at one site and you need it around the world in less than 10 seconds, there's one technology in the world that can do that, and that's DS8000. Beyond that, if you don't need to get your data around the world in 10 seconds, Flash system fits almost everything else in the open system space, in the IBM I space, in the Linux One space, and we have strong conversations about it because of how that technology has matured in every other area. That it used to be a lot of barriers, and I think it's really gained from IBM's knowledge and experience in the other families.
I would add to that one of the pleasures of selling and supporting those products is that very often I get calls from customers asking, so a customer that already has these IBM products, asking about a feature or function. They heard about it, or they saw it, or they read about it, and they want to be able to do it. And they expect that our answer to them is going to have dollars and cents. Well, that'll be a service call or an order. And instead, often we can say, log into the interface. Let's have a Teams or a WebEx meeting. Let me show you that that feature already exists. You're already using it. I can help you use that virtualized code base to solve problems outside your array inside your data center.
Oh man, that's so well put. That is great to hear. And you know, you both have mentioned sort of how the whole line has been folded down to where we now have this consistent flash system model. I can tell you from my standpoint inside the company that in February of this year, I think we've achieved the best flash system family that I've seen in my 6 years here. One of the struggles that we used to have, and you both alluded to this, was, you know, when you had Spectrum Accelerate-based product, when you had StoreWise, when you had Flash System, you had to have a lot of conversations about, well, why do I want to use this one versus this one? And in fact, we were getting in our own way. And when they streamlined the whole portfolio and provided this real consistency from top to bottom, things became a lot easier. But we had an issue. And again, I'm speaking internally. You may have a different view of it externally. But when we had, say, the Flash System 5100, it was a 2U 24-drive system, NVMe based. And we had a Flash System 7200, 2U 24-drive NVMe based system. And we had a Flash System 9200, 2U 24-drive NVMe based. The problem was everything looked exactly the same. And again, we were spending time trying to explain, well, here's where I think you would use this one, you know, more optimally versus this. As of February of this year, to me, this line makes incredible sense. A Flash System 5200, 1U, 12 drives, and if I want to step up, if I need more horsepower or more capability, if I step to a 7300, it's 2U, has twice as many drives, 24, and has twice as many ports. And if I want even more, I step up to the 9500, that's 4U, 48 drives, and again, twice as many ports. Is this matching? I mean, does my perception of the line match yours? And I do not want to put words in your mouth. I hope that it does, but you know, what do you see in the market?
No, I think that makes sense, and especially the pricing simplicity. And you look at the 7300 having as much performance as the previous flagship, and now it's squarely in the middle. The 9500 is in another universe. And so from performance and capacity, if you really want to pack in just the most amount of density and performance, the 9500 is a great way to go. I'm a fan of hyperswapping 7300s because I think the price and the availability picture of doing that still gives you massive amounts of performance, still a lot of capacity, and it's a great fit. And then, yeah, the 5200 for a smaller customer or a remote location is excellent as well. So it's a pretty simple toolbox to navigate through, and we appreciate that.
And I'm glad to hear that, because to me, the story is so much easier now for a prospective client. We don't have to hold their hand. It's much easier to just perceive the differences. But what really makes me happy is hearing you guys talk about hyperswap. And, you know, I'd mentioned that my time, 10 years at LSI and 4 years at NetApp doing competitive and all of those, it's an inherent risk that I run. Every time I look at any product, I immediately start thinking about, well, okay, how does the competition view this? What do they have at this level? Can they do this sort of thing? And I have to admit, I was blown away when I learned about hyperswap and the fact that IBM offers hyperswap starting at a FlashSystem 5035, right there in the middle of the entry space, where to find that kind of capability on a lot of other systems out in the marketplace, you have to step way up in the product line to get that sort of ability. So I'm really, really pleased to hear that you also view this as a significant opportunity in your business place.
I'll take that a step further and say that the fact that the interface has become unified as well, and the fact that all the products interoperate, replicate back and forth with each other, has made that even more pervasive, because in that need to consume quickly with agility, the having to learn 10 different interfaces, 5 different skill sets, is becoming more and more of a challenge for business, not because they don't have smart people, but because of the technological churn always happening over and over again. So the ability to say, what you see out at the edge, what you'll see at a kiosk or at a distribution site, and what you see in the data center is the same administrative interface, the same tool set. And if I need to move things for redundancy around, the ability to replicate back and forth between them, because it's all the same code base, is also a game changer.
Oh, thank you. That is great to hear. You know, they always tell you never ask a question where you don't know the answer. But I'm going to risk that and ask you two gentlemen, where do you see this market heading? Do you see it as primarily just flash-based, or are you still seeing hybrid as a big opportunity out there? I'm just curious, from evolving solutions standpoint, where do you see things today, and where do you see them heading in the near future?
Yeah, I think, you know, we support some very large customers who have all different kinds of data requirements, different tiers. And for performance-based block storage, fiber channel attached, or even IP attached, now the flash system is very simple and it covers all those requirements very nicely. But there's still a requirement for low-cost spinning disk. And on the 7300, I like that you can attach the 92 drive enclosures to that, fill those up completely with large-scale, slow spinning disk. And if you just need a target repository to stream backup data to that you want to have reasonable recovery from, that's a great use case for that. We have several large customers doing that, and it relies on the economics of disk, and for just streaming data to it, it performs great. It's not something you're going to run an application on, but a lot of times you need a repository to keep things encrypted and on-premise, and that's a great use case for it. And we also see different and newer ways to leverage physical tape, and whether you're knowingly doing it or whether it's abstracted behind something like IBM Spectrum Scale and Spectrum Archive, there's ways to leverage that and get economics on premise that are a tenth of the cost of Amazon Deep Glacier for the type of data that you're going to store and never need to access. But everyone has growing amounts of that type of data, more and more and more. And if I need to access it, it's okay. It may take minutes to come back, but that's a very rare requirement. You know, we had a customer that we asked about that, and they very quickly found 6 petabytes of data that fit that model. And we used that to do a quick cost justification, and now we're heading towards helping them try it out, because they all know about this kind of data. And even starting at a very small scale, it doesn't have to be 6 petabytes. There's still ways to leverage different types of media, but it's about, you know, instead of which block storage device is right for you, it's about understanding your access requirements, the performance requirements you need, disaster recovery, high availability. And when you know those things, then you can line up with the appropriate technology, and there's still a fit for many more things, because the requirements are vast outside of just performance-based block storage.
Well, I appreciate that. Ted, is there anything you'd like to add to that, where you see things heading, particularly in your, you know, architect role there? You're really getting into the nitty-gritty of things a lot of times.
I would build on what Joel talked about, where there's ever increasingly a need to understand what customers are doing. That the days of selling a widget, a product, those days are gone. That because of all of this need for agility, understanding how customers' work happens, what does their business do, and what kinds of things are they doing, help better define what sort of products they need. I still experience customers who need tape because they have incredibly large static data sets they want to protect. So they can stream data to tape, big, huge tapes, ridiculously fast, and then put them in a vault somewhere. I also have customers who are doing analytic behavior, not necessarily ridiculously fast, but on truly mind-blowing data sets. So their need for random access of that data leads them down large, deep spinning disk arrays. I also have customers who are looking at, how do I more easily move my data from point A to point B into and out of public cloud and hybrid cloud workloads. And all of those things together are pushing both us and our customers to have far richer understandings of what they're doing. It's no longer, I need a disk drive, I need a storage array. Increasingly, it's, I need to understand the solution in order to help. It's as if, rather than ordering from an a la carte menu, I need to know what meal a customer, what, you know, is it dinner, is it lunch, are you looking for a quick snack, in order to give you a better experience and in how to enable their business. And the IBM portfolio really makes that easier for me to do.
That's fantastic. Kat, I should check in with you. Are there any questions that people have specifically raised that they'd like addressed?
I have not seen any questions come through the chat, but this is a great reminder. If you do have questions, please place them there. But I do have actually one question to ask the panel. I think Ted was the one who was talking about our new generation of FlashCore modules and how they can do 3-to-1 compression. Is there any performance penalty for that type of thing?
Not at all. That's
zero.
That's one of the most exciting things, is that happens in hardware in the same way that self-encrypting drives do their encryption physically on chip. There's no penalty at all for that.
And what is really cool about that is that as that data comes screaming into the flash system, as fast as that data can be sent, it's encrypted, or compressed. It's the last thing that's happening to it as it goes in. And as you're pulling it out, it's being decompressed in hardware, and that's the first thing that's happening. So as Ted said, there's no performance impact, and it's completely transparent to whatever your application usage is. It's just happening, and the impact on economics is really amazing. And, you know, people, I frequently get asked by prospective clients, well, you know, is it really worth it? What are other people doing? Well, other people, the average flash system, 90% of them are being sold with flash core modules. So that tells you that the overwhelming majority of people are finding it, as both Joel and Ted said, to be the best economic solution, and where, you know, everything is not about performance, but at the same time, we know performance remains always an important thing. I always ask people, when you go into Best Buy or wherever you're going and you're going to buy your own computer, you know, your own notebook, do you ask them to show you something really good from 2 years ago? Or do you ask to see the most cutting edge thing you can get, because you know you're going to own this for a while? And while it's going to feel super fast today, it's not going to feel that way to you down the road. Well, that's one of the huge benefits of flash systems and flash core modules. And one little tidbit I'd like to throw in, because I found this so fascinating when they created flash core modules, is there's all kinds of underlying technology going on. And it all is possible because IBM has the ability to monitor every cell in a flash core module. And because of that, we can adjust the wear level to keep it smooth, to keep it very consistent. If we see cells that are a little weaker than others, we actually tend to write to them less often until wear leveling comes out. But one of the coolest things is, in a flash, a solid state drive, doesn't matter who makes it. The way it works is there's this little gate that swings open, swings closed, and that's how you're getting ones and zeros. That's your data being stored. And flash has a preset voltage that's applied that swings that gate open or closed. The problem is, as flash ages, as flash wears, just like people, it tends to slow down a little bit, not work quite as smoothly. And as flash in an industry standard commodity drive begins to get older and wear, that gate doesn't swing open all the time or doesn't swing closed all the time correctly. And that cell, it gets marked as a problem and it has to try it again and again, and then it gets marked bad. And so, and this is taking time. Well, one of the really cool things about flash core module is because IBM monitors every cell, we know exactly what's going on. We have something called variable voltage. And we have developed these systems now for years and years. We actually modify the voltage so that it correctly swings open and closed, and it helps extend that wear and endurance of the flash. So there are so many unique little advantages like this that for the most part are hidden from clients, but which make life easier for everybody involved in the process, particularly somebody, like Evolving Solutions, where the last thing you guys want is to get a call from, one of your clients saying, hey, this stuff's not working, we're failing cells right and left. Hopefully the design of a flash core module really minimizes that type of phone call for you.
Great, thank you guys for answering. There actually was a question that came through. Are there restrictions on the 3-to-1 compression guarantees? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
Well, it just so happens I can elaborate a little bit on that. The 3-to-1, IBM, ever since they introduced FlashCore Module in 2018, has had a 2-to-1 sight unseen guarantee. We were very confident that on the whole, the clients would have enough mixed data types that we would see effectively 2-to-1 compression. You know, some data might be compressing a little more, others a little less. But on the whole, 2-to-1. When they brought the new FlashCore 3 modules out, the thing is, there was a lot of discussion about, do we make this 3-to-1 now that the module is able to do it? And it's a little trickier than you'd think because you can't control the client's data. So there are some restrictions on it. They're not draconian by any means. They're relatively simple, that the client has to have the correct kind of data. If the client was, say, a JPEG image repository, that is a bad choice because that's already compressed data, and you're not going to compress it 3-to-1. But that's not a good description of most clients and their data. So there are some simple new rules that apply. Those are available to be seen online. But for the most part, IBM is trying to keep it simple still and not complicate the business partner's life, not complicate the client's life. Just make it a nice, easy process.
Roger, I'm going to add to that just a little bit. One of the real appeals to hardware compression and hardware encryption is that it extends the usable service life of my servers by taking those functions and putting them in the storage array next to the data where we think they belong, as opposed to having the server do all that work. So some of those rules about how I get 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or possibly even more are directly aligned to that. If you need to encrypt your data, let the storage array encrypt the data. If your data was already encrypted, then it would be very difficult to get good compression because the nature of encryption makes what's behind the encryption fairly impenetrable. So that doesn't mean I can't encrypt the data. It means don't do encryption inside the server anymore. Do it in the storage array where it belongs. And just like Roger said, if I'm worried about doing compression of data, then rather than having the host do this compression, rather than trying to create compressed data in the first place, my ideal workloads do native data, native IO, and I let the array handle that kind of compression.
I really appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to what Ted said, I see a requirement for a guarantee being less and less over time. I mean, I think that was, I need a guarantee because this technology is new and compression is new. And for the most part, people have been attempting compression and data reduction for a while now, regardless of what array it is. The part that makes IBM unique is doing it in hardware with no performance impact. But people in general are going to know how compressible their data is, and that will become more and more common knowledge because chances are you're migrating from something that was trying to do that before. And so I see the need for that being less and less, and confidently knowing that, hey, you know what your data is, and this will go up to 3-to-1, and if your data will do that, then away you go. You won't need to worry about a guarantee.
Very much so. And from that performance standpoint, the one other thing to point out, and this is really good, every vendor loves to, come up with hero numbers, and it's like, here's the ridiculous number that no one will ever achieve in the real world. But, if you want to compare our ridiculous number against another vendor's ridiculous number against another vendor's number, you can do that. One of the really interesting things is, see, this gives me goosebumps because I've watched this in POCs, is that one of the beautiful things about a FlashCore module and Flash systems is that you don't have to spend any cycles thinking about exactly what both Ted and Joel were just talking about. It's like I'm not going to have to factor the compression in and figure out how much of an impact is that going to have on my workloads. And I'm running a lot of workloads on this storage, and am I going to have a problem with any of my existing SLAs? No, you're not, because we're not going to slow the storage down just to give you the economic benefit of that compressed data. So things like your service level agreements are much easier because you don't have to factor in if the system's going to be slowed down because of a whole lot of compression taking place. So it is a true unique differentiator. And to me, it is still mind-boggling that a 2.5-inch drive could deliver up to 115 terabytes. I'm sitting here with a 4-drive Synology box in my house that I use as the main network drive. And with 4 3.5-inch hard drives, I've got about 16 terabytes of capacity. And here's this little flash drive that just blows that away. And I love that, I believe it was Joel stated early on, and Ted also, I think, that from an economic standpoint, IBM allows you to do this at all kinds of levels. You don't have to be this super high-end client to take advantage of this. You can be an entry client. And because of Spectrum Virtualize across the entire portfolio, the underlying software stack is consistent and the rules are consistent. Definitely, as you step up in the line, you can do a few more things because you've got the elbow room, the horsepower to do them. But learn it once, use it everywhere. And for those clients who also use Spectrum Virtualize for public cloud, nothing new to learn there. It's the same as what you've been doing on-prem. So great consistency and simplicity.
Great answers, guys. Thank you. No other questions have come through the chat. So do you guys have any final thoughts or anything you want to share before we conclude?
I don't. Thank you for having me here, and happy to do it because it's easy to get on and talk about these kind of things. It's the same thing we talk to customers about, and that's why these technologies are unique.
I'd echo that. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining.
And I very much appreciate Joel and Ted, both of you, providing your time and your expertise. You both have some fascinating histories that you brought to play. It's kind of amazing the amount of experience that the two of you possess. So thank you very much.
Yeah, one other thing to add, Roger, I think that I thought of is just next week I will be going down with a customer to IBM's briefing center in Tucson, Arizona, and I would encourage you to take advantage of that. They do a great job down there, and we appreciate getting some education, having a little fun, and now that we're able to do those kind of things again, take advantage of it.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much to our panel and also for all of our attendees. This recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel where you can also see some of our previous Tech Talks. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording and hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.